Hi, and welcome back to the Britt Mayer Show. I am very, very excited about this guest that I am bringing to the table. Dr. Frank Turek is a dynamic speaker. I have watched so many of his videos, and they have helped me tremendously when it comes to apologetics. Do not be afraid if you are not a Christian and you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh no, I don't want to do this. This is going to be faith-based. Please listen. I promise you that you are going to find this fascinating. I have binge watched Dr. Frank Turek just go through evidence that truly does demand a verdict when it comes to this old book and the proof of the gospel. So he is the president of crossexamine.org. He presents powerful and entertaining evidence for Christianity at churches, high schools, and secular college campuses that often begin hostile to his message. He has debated several prominent atheists, including Christopher Hitchens and more. And he is and he's debated the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine. Thank you so much, Dr. Frank Turek, for joining us today. I'm really, really excited about this conversation.
Hey, Britt, you just mentioned that, this is going to be faith-based. I want to point out that every position is faith-based, that every position trusts in something. The question is, what are you trusting in? Do you have evidence for what you're trusting in? So if there are people who are not Christians who are going, oh, no, this is faith. Well, your position's faith-based too. The question is, do you have evidence for the faith you put into that position?
It's so important. The evidence issue is where I really want to put that linchpin in it, because I think if your evidence falls through the cracks, then it should crumble your argument for or against what you believe in. And that's what you go after is the actual evidence of what and why we believe. So let's just start here. What do you see right now as the current spirit of the age that's targeting our youth, where we see so much confusion when it comes to the trans movement? We've got porn that's exploding. We have this nihilistic viewpoint on life that's affecting so many of our kids' school shootings they have exploded recently. What do you see is the reason spiritually behind this spirit that we have seen plaguing our youth?
Well, I think too often nowadays, and this has even infected the church to a certain extent, Britt, we're more interested in meology than theology. In other words, we want to create a world where our desires are fulfilled. We want to do what we want to do. We don't want to bow our knee to a creator who has created us and established us for a purpose and wants us to know him and then to make him known. We want to do our own thing. This is why when I go to college campuses, and I do a lot of them every year, we go through a presentation called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, based on a book that I co-wrote a number of years ago. And after I go through the evidence, if someone gets up to the microphone and expresses any hostility at all, I'll normally ask them this question. And the question is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And most of the time, people are honest and they'll say no. And then I'll say, wait, you claim to be an atheist? You claim to be a beacon of reason? And I ask you if something were true, would you believe it? And you say no? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't in the head. The problem's in the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Now, here's the problem. When you're young, you can make yourself happy doing a lot of fun, selfish, but ultimately sinful and destructive things. However, over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone listening to us who's like over 35 knows what I'm talking about. Because if you just try and live for yourself and do whatever you want, with whomever you want, whenever you want to do it, if you become a me monster, you're not going to be able to hold down a relationship. And you're probably going to wind up addicted, broken, alone, and probably even prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. But a lot of people don't like that. They want to go their own way. In fact, I think most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're on the run because they want to do what they want to do. I get it. A lot of times I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want to have any moral restraint on me. But if you throw off all moral restraints, ultimately it's going to come back and hurt you.
Yeah, that's really good. You know, even in the Christian the Christian circles, we have seen a real uptick in this deconstructivism of these kids who they were once believers. They went to church on Sundays, maybe even on Wednesdays. Their mom dragged them along to all the Bible studies. And then they hit somewhere around my age, and there's this deconstruction element that starts to take place. And we've even seen prominent leaders and speakers and musicians who I grew up, almost idolizing, that are now walking away from the faith. Why do you think, in connection to what you just said, just as a blanket statement, why are we even seeing that hit our Christian circles so much right now?
I think for two reasons. The first reason is people want to do what they want to do. And then secondly, I think people were never, who say these kind of things, were never taught the evidence for the faith. They think it's all a matter of blind faith. Like, you don't have any evidence, you just believe. It's all emotional. There's no intellect behind it. Well, why should I give my life to that if it's not really true? I want to do what I want to do. Or I have compassion for a certain group that I think the Bible excludes, like LGBTQ people or whatever. They think, if I can't be for those people, if the Bible doesn't want me to be for those people, how can I believe the Bible? Now, what people don't realize there is that love does not require approval. We often think that if you're going to love somebody, you have to approve what they do. Now, you're a mom. You know this isn't true. I mean, if you approve of everything your 11-year-old wants to do, are you loving? No, you're unloving, right? You got to stand in the way of evil. If you're going to love somebody, you just can't approve of everything they want to do. But a lot of people think that's what love is, and it's not. In fact, we just saw that at just a few days ago at the inauguration, that bishop got up there, that woman bishop, and started to scold President Trump about LGBTQ and all this. And I actually commend her for being politically engaged. I think pastors need to be more politically engaged. So I commend her for that. I just think she's wrong about what she said because she's disagreeing with the Bible. And she's conflating love with approval. Love doesn't mean you approve of everything somebody wants to do. In fact, Paul, who wrote that famous passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, says this: love always protects. Love always perseveres. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. And yet, pastors like that, bishops like that, ignore all that and just decide that love means I've got to approve of what everyone wants to do. Except, notice she didn't approve of what Trump wanted to do, right? She thinks Trump is some sort of evil guy that somehow wants to exclude people. Where does she get that moral position from?
Yeah, I think what you just touched on is super important. Is we've elevated this word love, and we've forgotten the aspect of obedience and knowing, actually being biblically literate. And so when we elevate love to just be the ultimate pursuit, love is a good thing. And it's a very important thing. It's a huge staple in the Bible. God is love. But if we don't know who God is, then we can't properly define love. So I think that is a huge missing element in modern day Christianity.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a misunderstanding of what love is. Love is not approval. Love does not require approval. And the people that may disagree with you on an issue, they can say they love you and disagree with you. In fact, I had a debate a number of years ago with some LGBTQ activists, and the topic of the debate was, does love require affirmation and approval? And at one point, of course, we were saying no. They were trying to say yes. And so at one point during the debate, I looked over at them and I said, do you love us? And they said, yes. I said, do you approve of our position? They said, no. I said, you just lost the debate. That's our position, that you can love somebody without approving everything they do.
That's so good. That's why words matter and meaning matters. And if we can't properly define the terms, then we can't properly engage, and we actually don't even know how to defend what we believe because we've lost track of what words mean. So going into that, like why things are so important, let's talk a little bit about the evidence. I would love for you to share if I was a skeptic and I said, okay, I think that this is real pretty. There's a lot of great stories in it. I really like the poetry. There's some cool prophecy. Jesus was a really good guy. Like he came and he said some things that are amazing. He seemed really compassionate, but was it real? Like, did it actually happen historically? I don't know. Convince me.
Okay, well, you only need to establish two facts. Fact number one, God exists. Fact number two, Jesus rose from the dead. If those two facts are true, game over. Christianity's true. Okay, and so what's some evidence that God exists? Very briefly. Typically, I go through three arguments that God exists. One is the universe had a beginning, so it must have had a beginner. The second is the universe is designed and life is designed. And the third is that there is a moral standard that we're obligated to obey. And those three arguments point back to a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. Now, we don't have time to go through all the details on those arguments, but let me just give you one piece of evidence that even atheists agree with. Even atheists today agree that the universe had a beginning, that space, time, and matter leapt into existence out of nothing, that there was no space, time, or matter, and then suddenly there was. Well, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, as even atheists are admitting, what could have caused that? Only something outside of space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, and also intelligent to have a mind to make a choice to create. Now, I always ask audiences, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. And they'll say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God? And the answer is, we don't. I mean, this could be Allah at this point, right? Just because you have evidence that the universe had a beginning, and a fine-tuned beginning, I might add, doesn't mean it's the Christian God. I agree.
That's good.
But it could be the Christian God. If we then go and discover that Jesus really rose from the dead, and there's evidence for that, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,992 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. So what is the evidence that Jesus really rose from the dead? Well, in the book, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, we have a whole chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. Let me give you two very briefly. One is called embarrassing testimony. Historians know when they look at a text, if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why do you think it would be probably true? Why would they say that?
Well, because if they wanted to make you believe in something, they're going to leave that element out.
Yeah, they don't want to embarrass themselves, right? You know, you might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, think about the New Testament. And this is true of the Old Testament too. We don't have time for the Old. Let's just take some of the things in the New Testament. First of all, the disciples depict themselves as dim-witted, right? They don't know what Jesus is talking about half the time. So they're dumb coughs, right? That's embarrassing. Jesus calls their leader Satan. He says, Peter, get behind me, Satan. That's embarrassing. Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. I mean, this is like a Monty Python movie, you know, run away. They all run away, right? And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man invent that? No.
Certainly not.
No, and you would never say in that culture the women were the first witnesses. You would never invent that because in that culture, a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They were. And one of them, by the way, was a formerly demon-possessed woman.
Right.
Oh, gee, what a great witness you got there. They're not making this up. And then Jesus has embarrassing details around him. His own family thinks he's out of his mind. That's Mark chapter 3. His own brothers don't believe in him. That's John chapter 6 or 7. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus's bloodline, Rahab and Tamar. Do you think that Matthew, when he wrote down the genealogy, said to himself, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in. No. And then you've got other shady characters like Judah, David, Bathsheba. These are all people in the bloodline that committed sins, and yet they say, oh, they're part of the bloodline of the Messiah. You would never find that in, say, the Pharaoh's bloodline in Egypt. They whitewash all that. In fact, people today whitewash their histories. I don't care who's in the White House. Whoever is in the White House, that press secretary is a propagandist, right? That press secretary can never admit anything the president or his administration has done wrong. They're always spinning, trying to avoid embarrassing details, embarrassing things that have happened. But you don't see that in the Bible. In fact, you probably know who Dennis Prager is, right?
Yep.
Dennis Prager, a conservative Jewish man who believes the Old Testament's true, not the New, when it comes to Jesus, said this. He said, the main reason I believe the Old Testament is true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history of themselves. And Dennis is right. Why would they do that? Why would they? I mean, how many embarrassing things do the Jews do in the Old Testament? They're constantly being dope slapped by God, right? You're worshiping other gods. I'm going to judge you. Just over and over again. They never quite get the message. They're not inventing it. Now, of course, I'd ask Dennis, if embarrassing testimony is evidence the Old Testament is true, why is it not evidence the New is true? Yeah. It is. The second major, and these are just 2 of 10 reasons. The second major reason we think the New Testament writers are telling the truth is because these people who were in a position to know whether Jesus rose from the dead or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. Remember, all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, are all Jews. They already think they're God's chosen people. They have no motive to make this up. And yet they say a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. Those are 2 things Jews didn't think could happen. They didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. And they didn't think anybody could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. Yet here these Jews are saying, hey, there's a guy that claimed to be God and rose from the dead, and we're willing to die for it. We're willing to abandon all of our beliefs or most of our beliefs, and we're going to go to the mat for this. And then under persecution, they don't crack. They all, except for, 1 or 2 that didn't, like maybe John didn't die, but the rest of them, they all died. Why? My friend Jim Wallace, who doesn't live far from you there in California, the cold case homicide detective who wrote the book Cold Case Christianity, he says whenever he finds a dead body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 motivations why that guy was murdered. I know that guy was murdered for one or more of only 3 reasons. Either there was a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power are the 3 things that can motivate people to murder. In fact, they're the same 3 things that can motivate any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And that's what sin is. And so Jim says, if you're going to say that these New Testament writers invented all this, you got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. So, Britt, let me ask you a couple questions. Did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead?
I'm going to say no.
No, they didn't get
definitely no.
No. Did they get money?
Absolutely not.
No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers.
No, they were not.
Did they get power?
No.
No, they got the opposite of power. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They had no motive to make it up. Now, people are going to say, well, you're going to say that, if they died for it, how does that prove Christianity? Because Muslims will die for Islam. Well, yeah, but what you're forgetting is when Muslims die for Islam, they haven't witnessed anything that lets them know that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the Christian martyrs of the first century witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Yes, some people will die for a lie they think is the truth, but nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie.
That's really good.
The New Testament writers knew that he died and rose again. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done this. Let me say one other thing, because I think this is important, and people don't realize this. And for those of you who are watching or listening, what I'm about to say might be startling, because if you believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God as I do, this is going to sound like I'm dissing the Bible, but I'm not. Just stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. And you go, wait, how can that be? Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why were they Christians? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They then later wrote it down. In other words, Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event. The
eyewitnesses.
Yeah. There would be no books written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, and then these people went and died for it, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. In other words, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You would not have these documents written down unless this event occurred. You certainly wouldn't have these people dying for it unless the event occurred. Now, thankfully, they did write it down so we could know about it and orient our lives according to it. But they wrote it down because they witnessed something. They didn't invent this. They had no motive to invent it. So those are just a couple of reasons. And when we're looking at these, some people say, well, Frank, you're arguing in a circle. You're using the Bible to prove the Bible. No, you're not, you don't realize when historians look at these texts, they're not considering them inspired texts. They just want to see if they have the hallmarks of historical testimony in them. And they do. I don't have time to go through all the other evidence, but if you just look at them as if they're just documents from the first century, what do they say? Are they getting things right? Can we cross-check it? Yeah, we can. Yeah, they're getting things right.
That's really helpful. Okay, so let's go here. If I say, okay, I take that, I'm going to bite and say, okay, sounds good. Sounds like there was an actual event in history at the beginning of time that set this whole thing into motion. And then, yes, sounds like there were eyewitnesses who corroborate that there was, in fact, a crucifixion and a resurrection of this man, Jesus, who was a Jew in the first century. Sounds right. Sounds good. How, though, would I know that Christianity really is what Christ preached, what Jesus preached in Nazareth back then, is the only true means of salvation?
Well, if he rose from the dead, if he predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead to prove he was God, then he's God, and whatever God teaches is true, right? That would make sense, right? If he is the moral standard, whatever he teaches is true, he's not going to lie to us. And if he said that he was the only way, then we are going to take on his authority he is. But even if you don't take it on his authority, I think it just makes sense philosophically. Why? Because, well, maybe I ought to put it this way. Do you know that you can get to heaven by being good?
You can or you cannot?
You can.
Okay.
You just have to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you?
Oh, I'm almost there.
Okay. Right. No, we've all fallen short. We've all sinned, right? So if there is an infinite standard of justice out there, that's what we mean by justice, right? But do we deserve heaven or hell? If the standard is infinite, we don't meet up to the standard, right? Mm. So we must be punished. But God is infinitely just, and he has to punish sin, otherwise he wouldn't be infinitely just. However, he's also infinitely loving, so he doesn't want to punish us. So what does he do? Well, he has to find an innocent substitute who can be punished in our place, who hasn't committed his own sin. So by trusting in him, God could remain just, but we could also be justified and permitted into his kingdom. And this is what Jesus does. He adds humanity to his deity. He comes to earth. He lives the perfect life in our place. He allows the very creatures that rebelled against him, that he created, to torture and kill him so he could take their punishment upon himself. And then he offers a free gift, a pardon, if you will, no strings attached, to these people. All you need to do is accept it, because a pardon isn't a pardon until it's accepted. Because he's not going to force anybody into heaven against their will. You know, there's a lot of people that don't want anything to do with Jesus now. They're not going to want him in eternity either. So God gives us the free pardon for our sins, so God can not only forgive us, but he can give us his righteousness. This is why Jesus is the only way. He's the only one that solves the problem, right? There's no other way you can allow an infinitely just being to allow us to go unpunished. He's got to punish someone else in our place who volunteers to do it, and that's what Jesus does. And so at the end of the day, there's only two things you're going to get in the afterlife. You're either going to get justice or you're going to get grace. I don't want justice, because if I get justice, then I get punished. I want grace. Or you could put it another way. At the judgment, either you're going to pay or Jesus is going to pay. Who would you rather have pay? I don't want to pay for my sins. Jesus can pay for my sins. So that's why Jesus is the only way. It's not an arbitrary claim. He doesn't just say, well, I just said so. There's no other way to reconcile an infinitely just being with an infinitely loving being and allow innocent or guilty people to go unpunished. Is the only way you can do it is find an innocent substitute. So that's what he does.
So good. So my final question as we're closing up, and I could spend an hour with you, but just in light of those two issues that we just touched on, the proof that Christ is the only way. He says he's the only way. You only come to the Father through me. That's it. There's not like, you don't get what the term now is, that there are many ways that lead to God. Jesus is like, I'm it. You come to the Father through me. So we have proof positive that God creates the world, that Jesus comes. He is God in flesh. He's crucified and he's resurrected. We have him on authority saying that he is the only way to the Father. It's the only way. You come through me. Why is it easier to believe in that than to be an atheist?
Well, to be an atheist, you can't explain anything. You can't explain why we're here. You can't explain why the universe exists. You can't explain why it's fine-tuned. You can't explain where first life came from or subsequent life forms, because even evolutionists are admitting their theory doesn't work. You can't explain why there's objective morality, that it's really wrong to say torture babies for fun, or it's really wrong to say gay bash, if you want to use something that people would agree with who might not agree with you politically. It's wrong to do that. Why is it wrong? Because there's a standard outside yourself that you're obligated to obey. You can't explain why there are objective laws of logic or how your conscience. You can't explain the laws of mathematics. You can't explain any of these things. You can't explain all of the miracles and the prophecies that Jesus seemed to have done, and the evidence shows that he did do these things. You can't explain anything if you're an atheist. And when people say, well, I'm being reasonable, but you can't even explain reason. I mean, if you're a materialistic atheist, that you think everything is the result of the laws of physics, you can't even trust what you think. Why? Because every thought you have is merely the result of the laws of physics. So why should you believe it's true? Right? Are you just a molecular machine? Are you just a moist robot? If you're a moist robot, why should I believe anything you think? Or why should you believe anything you think? But you know what? You can believe things you think. You can trust your senses. Well, if you can, there must be an explanation for that. Yeah, the explanation is you're not a molecular machine. You're not a moist robot. You have a body, but you also have a mind. You have a body, but you also have a soul. So those things are best explained by theism. They're not explained by atheism. That's why we say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. You have to have a lot of blind faith to be an atheist. Now, of course, in the Bible, faith doesn't mean blind. Faith means trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. There's good evidence that God exists. There's good evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. There's good evidence the documents we call the New Testament are telling the truth. If that's the case, Christianity is true. The only question is, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, what are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
I love this conversation with you. I think it's so important to talk through these things. I think that a lot of people in my generation and the younger generations kind of shy away from it, and it's that like, oh, well, you do you believe what you believe, like we all can live in harmony together. But it is so important, because if what the claims of this are true, then there is judgment at the end of it all. And I know that my generation doesn't like that. We don't like, for some reason, we've just gotten really like appalled with the idea of ultimate justice. But if the Bible is true, then we're going to have to reconcile that and realize that at some point we all are going to stand for judgment. And if this is true, then like you said, we either get judged on like our own merit and what we've done, and we for sure have failed, or the Christ steps in and is judged on our behalf. So this is actually very important. It's not a small matter. Token Christianity also, I think, has left that out, the severity of how important it is to know what we believe and why we believe it.
Also, Britt, you mentioned that our culture, or this generation, your generation, doesn't want justice, but in fact, that's all they talk about. Right?
Isn't that interesting?
This is unjust. That is unjust. We have to have social justice. There's oppressors and oppressed out there. And wait. First of all, where are you getting the standard from? And you're screaming for justice and in some cases, rightfully so, right? You think there are rights, you think there's justice, but you don't think there's any ultimate source of justice. And you don't think people that have literally gotten away with murder here on this earth shouldn't be punished? Wait a minute. You can't have it both ways. If you don't want justice in the afterlife, why do you expect it to be here? Do you know there won't be justice done unless there's a being like God? Because so much that happens here is never reconciled. So much that happens here. Yeah. So people get away with murder. They get away with it. And they never pay here. Well, if they're not going to pay here, where are they going to pay? There's no justice? No, there is justice.
Yeah, we do. We have a underlying hunger for justice, but then we're so appalled with the notion of there being ultimate justice. It's this real weird, and somehow my generation just accepted that as the normal, but it really isn't. And it's a new factor, in our culture. It wasn't always like this. There was a time not too long ago where those that are my age, they believed passionately in an intelligent being that creates law and order that is above and beyond us, and that we reside in temporarily. And then ultimately we meet, and we are up against that. But I think it's important to have these conversations to draw that back in, to draw my generation back into that reality and say, no, this is actually the most important thing. Politics is important. It's temporary. Culture, it's important. It's also temporary. But this is something that's gonna it lasts forever, and we better get it right now.
That's right. Nothing more important than eternity. Yeah.
It matters in the scope of eternity. So I'm so thankful for the work that you are doing on this front. For those who want to learn more and to follow you and all of your incredible work that you do, what are the best ways?
Well, our website's crossexamine.org, crossexamine with a D on the end of it.org. Our podcast is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So wherever they get podcasts, just look for I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We have a TV program. We have, of course, a pretty robust YouTube channel and Instagram channel, all on Cross-Examine, 2 words, Cross-Examine, or Frank Turek, you could find it. If you just Google Frank Turek, you'll find it. But there's a lot out there. And we also have some online courses as well, all off our website. So check all that out. The stuff that we do every week, though, is the podcast. I Don't Have Enough Faith. We do 2 of those a week. So I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
Oh, you're grinding it out to do 2 a week. That's a lot. It's good. That's so good. It's so needed. Like I said in the beginning, I've been binge watched your YouTubes, and I've actually shown my kids, because you have just such a way of presenting the facts in a way that's like, these are the facts. Like, we can get real emotional about it if we want, but they're still facts, and presenting that in a way that connects to, so now what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? These are the facts. So
that's right.
Thank you for just being such a champion of truth.
Thank you, Britt. Thanks for having me on the program. And
yes,
I hope people will check us out at the podcast and also the website. There's so much on the website, so that if they go to the website, they'll get everything else.
So good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. God bless.